Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome you once again to Wednesday nights with myself, Inayat Wadi. The time is just gone 5 minutes past 7 as we welcome our listeners, our viewers on Salam Media. And tonight's panel discussion is going to be a tribute to the late Sheikh Dr. Yusuf Al-Qaradawi, rahimahumullah. And we've learned sadly of the passing away of the great Sheikh. Now, alhamdulillah, this evening, once again, we have the opportunity to pay tribute to the life of Sheikh Dr. Yusuf Al-Qaradawi. And we have got quite a panel this evening. Shortly, we will be joined by Dr. Takriti from the Cordoba Foundation. We've got Fatima Asmal from the Institute for Learning and Motivation from ILM, South Africa. We've got Anwar Jhetam, who will be joining us later, Media Review Network, and also Security Risk Analyst Muhammed Nordien from now right until 9 p.m. But right now, we are going across to the UK to be joined by Dr. Anas Al-Takriti. Dr. Anas, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, Brother Inayat. It's a pleasure being with you again.
Yes, wonderful that you're able to join us. Now, we've seen so many tributes actually come through, paying tribute to the great Sheikh, and looking at Sheikh Dr. Yusuf Al-Qaradawi, obviously very old. In fact, we learned that he was actually born in the same year as the Queen of England, and passed away in the same month. Now, I'm not too sure, whether that is a coincidence, but at the end of the day, just looking at the life of Dr. Al-Qaradawi, and just looking at your memories and looking at him as a scholar, and what did he actually mean to the Muslim world is large?
First of all, inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un, and our condolences to the entire Muslim Ummah for the loss of this great man. And indeed, I don't think we exaggerate a single bit when we say that his passing is literally an end of an era. There was, in our midst right now, there is no one like him. We literally, I spent a couple of hours with some scholars who were students of his, and we went through the names of all the noble scholars that we have, alhamdulillah, around the world. But we all agreed that none of them, despite their high caliber, exemplified the comprehensiveness of Islam, the attachment to the issue of Muslims, the expanse of knowledge and wisdom that Sheikh Yusuf Al-Qaradawi had. His passing is a loss that is very, very difficult to quantify. And in fact, I would go even further. I would say that yes, the Muslim Ummah has lost a huge figure, but his loss is also to the entire world. The message that he carried, the tolerance that he preached, the attempts that he made, the dozens of attempts that he made, if not even more, to reach out to those of other faiths and those even of no faith, in order to tell them that we as human beings, we need to create conditions of peace, of tolerance, of coexistence, of understanding, that we need to have a clear and transparent and absolutely honest debate. His standing by issues of human freedom, regardless of whether they were Muslim or non-Muslim, by the way. All of this makes him a figure that unfortunately today we look around and we don't see all of these traits being exemplified in one particular name as we had with Sheikh Yusuf Al-Qaradawi. So we mourn his passing, and we now brace ourselves for what is to come.
Well, in fact, in one of the tributes, Dr. Anas, I read was, he was a powerful voice of reason, of social justice and wisdom. And this sad moment is not only for Muslims, but for all humanity, because in paying tribute to him, one of the, in fact, there are three traits: his dynamism, his courage, and his charisma actually stood out.
Absolutely. I was witness to many of his meetings with people of faith and, like I said, of no faith from around the world, and how he introduced Islam to them, how he proposed that people collaborate and work together for the common good. That was something that virtually no one else could do with the same charisma, with the same depth knowledge that he possessed. I remember when hosting him on behalf of the Muslim Association of Britain in London in 2004, and his meetings in City Hall with the Mayor of London back then, Ken Livingstone. It was incredible how he managed to bridge the gap of probably misunderstanding, of miscomprehension and such, in few words, but in clarity and wisdom that was almost unparalleled. His standing by the main issues of Muslims across the world is something that we will miss. The fact that we have, we had in Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi rahimahullah, we had a scholar that not only did he possess a mountain of knowledge, literally volumes and volumes of 120 titles, which he published, and now there is a team of researchers that are collating all of this in what I am told will exceed 30 to 40 big volumes. Despite all of this, he never disassociated himself or distanced himself from any cause that afflicted Muslims anywhere around the world. I saw him beseech people to stand up for the Muslims in Kashmir. I saw him well up for the trait of Muslims, or the plight of Muslims in mid-Africa. I saw him how he cried for the Muslims in Iraq. I saw how he constantly made Palestine the very central of all the issues. It was something to behold, to be perfectly honest. And it's something that I am privileged to have witnessed firsthand.
Well, certainly, and also Dr. Anas, he was a giant among giants in the scholarly fraternity, and just looking at his depth of knowledge, and also looking at the rulings, his Islamic rulings, the fatwas that he had passed, and highly respected by scholars right across the entire world.
Correct. Many would even say that he revolutionized the field of jurisprudence. Only through the books and the teachings of Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi did we ever come across something called fiqh al-aqalliyat, the jurisprudence of minorities, where he addressed the issues of myself and you, Brother Inayat, and all those who are listening to us as Muslims living as minorities. And he understood fully that our contexts were totally different from the context of Muslim-dominant countries such as Saudi Arabia and Egypt. And therefore, we needed a different set of jurisprudence. Only back, many hundreds of years ago, we heard of the Imam al-Shafi'i, who did the same when he moved from one place to another and found that he needed to change and to revolutionize his fiqh. So his awareness of this, his dealing with the financial or modern contemporary financial matters of the day in terms of zakah and sadaqah and banking and investment and all of this, again, something that we seldom find anyone actually tackling head on as he did. And by the way, one of the greatest traits of Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi was that throughout his entire life, he came under vicious attacks, especially by those who call themselves traditionalists or conservatives. The attacks against him were vile. I remember trying to get through a statement by someone claiming that he was a scholar, attacking Sheikh Yusuf in the most vile of manners. Yet Sheikh Yusuf never, ever deserted his convictions, deserted his stands or his opinions for the pleasure of anyone. He was courageous. And by the way, I tell people, and I told people in an interview today here in the UK, I said, just look at the list of those who are attacking and criticizing him today. Believe you me, if you list the names, you'll know that the Sheikh died an honorable death.
Well, certainly, and also just while we are talking about his courage and his bravery, and we know he stood for truth, he stood for peace, he stood for justice, Dr. Anas, and also looking at the dictatorship across the entire Muslim world, they were actually terrified by his presence, and there were many attempts to silence him in the past as well.
It was amazing to see how Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi, since the past 10, 12 years, has been virtually seat-ridden. I mean, he's basically unable to walk freely in the such. Yet his word, his presence, his voice, his statements shook the most huge of palaces and the most opulent of palaces. And he managed to espouse and to adopt the movement of people against dictatorships, against oppression. He never cared for his own safety. And people don't realize that he himself was imprisoned for over a decade, for almost 14, 15 years, during the time of Jamal Abdel Nasser in Egypt. And also only recently, his eldest daughter was released from prison because she was captured by Sisi for over 2 years. So the Sheikh and his family came under incredible challenges. Their personal safety was always compromised, yet the Sheikh never ever shied away or turned away from what he felt was his convictions or his obligations.
Exactly. And also, I think, when one looks at the family that he's left behind, and he's left behind a pedigree that we know they may not be able to step into his shoes. But clearly, when one looks at his sons as well, all academics at the highest level. And this is the pedigree, alhamdulillah, that he has left behind, that we can remember the great Sheikh by.
I would contend the Sheikh has left a family of tens of millions, probably even hundreds of millions. Everyone who understood Islam according to the methodology and approach of Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi felt an immense loss. Many of my own colleagues tell me that despite the fact that they had never met the Sheikh, yet they know for a fact that for the past 30, 40, 50 years of their lives, they learnt and were educated and were inspired by the Sheikh. And one of them said that I feel a greater sense of grief than I did when my own honorable father passed away several years ago. The Sheikh left a legacy that is the most noble of legacies, and that is the legacy of knowledge. And that, inshallah, will continue to inspire many, many generations to come.
Well, inshallah, I know you've got to rush. Just finally, very quickly, looking at scholars and the legacy that he's left behind, the lessons for scholars right across the entire world, Dr. Anas.
The lesson is to understand Islam in its perfect manner. The Sheikh never, ever, ever agreed with those who thought that, keep it safe and say it's haram. He never agreed with this. He said we need to scrutinize, we need to analyze, we need to understand, we need to investigate, and we must present to the public the easiest versions of Islam so that we don't make carrying Islam a burden upon anyone. He understood Islam never to be a burden, never to be a responsibility that one might tire of or might try to take away, throw away. He always saw Islam as a facilitator for a better life for everyone, and that's how he presented Islam. It's incumbent upon our ulama, our scholars, our students of knowledge, to take upon the methodology and approach and understanding of Sheikh Yusuf, but also not to dedicate themselves entirely to knowledge so that they leave the public arena. They forget about being active, being out there, speaking the truth, facing corruption, facing oppression, and fighting for the cause of Muslims who cannot otherwise find a voice to deliver to the world.
Well, Dr. Anas, Jazakallah khairan, as always, for taking time out talking to us here at Salam Media, and especially tonight paying tribute to Dr. Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi, rahimahullah. We wish you all the best, inshallah. Allah accept, Allah reward your efforts. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It's been a pleasure, Brother Inayat.
Dr. Takriti from the Cordoba Foundation with us this morning and this evening. And when we come back, we still got a lot more. We still will be talking with Fatima, Asmal. We've got Anwar, Jhetam, and Muhammed Nordien coming through. And possibly we may even get someone out from the MJC, considering that Sheikh Qaradawi had visited South Africa in 2010. He even met Nelson Mandela. So that is quite relevant. The time is just gone, 19 minutes past 7 p.m. We come back and we will continue with our panel discussion Wednesday nights with myself, Inayat Wadi, paying tribute to Sheikh Dr. Yusuf al-Qaradawi.
It's a new era. Salam Media, humanitarian journalism.
For every child who lost a parent.
For every refugee who lost their home.
For every community without water.
For every person searching for a way to give, Africa Muslims Agency has been at your service for 35 years, connecting hearts and changing lives. Thank you for helping us to serve the needy since 1987. Support our journey by donating to Africa Muslims Agency as we commemorate 35 years of empowering, educating, and inspiring.
There's no smell that takes me back to the comfort of my childhood than the smell of black seed oil being applied by my nanny. Now I'm using tib black seed in my own home to soothe sniffles and coughs, to help with digestion and immunity, and of course, as part of my beauty routine. After all these years, I've come to appreciate the wisdom in finding comfort and shifa in trusted treatments like tib black seed. You can find tib black seed at all leading pharmacies or find out more at blackseed.co.za.
Over 33 million people have been affected by the devastating floods in Pakistan. Homes have been destroyed, crops have been swept away, and roads have been damaged. Families are mourning their loved ones while trying to survive these horrific conditions. Penny Appeal is on the ground now, delivering food, shelter, medical supplies, and water to those in need. You can help save a life by donating today. Visit our website www.pennyappeal.org.za or call 031 1100 573. Penny Appeal South Africa. Small change, big difference.
Listen to something fresh. Listen to Salam Media.
We continue with the broadcast this evening on Wednesday nights with myself, Inayat Wadi. Tonight's tribute is Dr. Yusuf Qaradawi, Sheikh Rahimahumullah. Very, very influential. A giant amongst giants. And we are now going straight across to join Fatima Asmal, Institute for Learning and Motivation, South Africa, ILM-SA. Sister Fatima, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome.
Walaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, Brother Inayat. Jazakallah khairan for inviting me to be on your program this evening. I must admit that it's very humbling for me to be part of your panel of guests. And I must also start with a disclaimer that I'm in no way an Islamic scholar or academically qualified to speak about the Sheikh, but I am truly humbled and honored to be given this opportunity to do so.
Well, I think, you have every right to be humbled because you have had the opportunity of actually meeting with the great Sheikh in 2010. And perhaps, Sister Fatima, we can actually start off by you recalling the moments when you met the great Sheikh and, just some of your experiences.
Bismillah. Firstly, I'd like to echo the sentiments expressed by Dr. Takriti. My condolences to everyone who has been touched by the loss of Sheikh Yusuf Qaradawi, rahimahullah. May Allah widen and illuminate his qabr and bless him with Jannah al-Firdaus without questioning.
Ameen.
And join him with the Siddiqeen, with the Salihin, and with the Shuhada. Ameen. Back in 2010, I heard that the Muslim Judicial Council was bringing Sheikh Yusuf Qaradawi to South Africa. And on the itinerary, I noticed that he was going to be visiting Johannesburg and that he was going to be going to Cape Town as well. I felt very, very disappointed. My heart sank when I noticed that he wasn't going to be coming to Durban. So I made contact with the then president of the Muslim Judicial Council, Maulana Sheikh Ihsan Hendricks, who is also now late. May Allah have mercy on him. And I asked Maulana why Yusuf Qaradawi could not come to Durban. Maulana responded by saying that he had a very, very hectic schedule and it would not be possible to come to Durban, but that I was more than welcome to go to Cape Town and that he personally, Maulana Ihsan Hendricks, would see to it that I would attend all of Sheikh Yusuf's programs in Cape Town and that I would, inshallah, have an opportunity to meet him as well. So I booked a ticket to Cape Town and Maulana Ihsan Hendricks was true to his word. He arranged transport for me from the moment that Sheikh Yusuf Qaradawi landed in Cape Town. So I was there at the Cape Town International Airport when he arrived, to a wonderful, beautiful, spirited welcome from dozens of brothers and sisters from the Muslim community in Cape Town. And thereafter, Maulana himself, as well as a sister that he was married to at the time, Sister Aisha Hendricks, they would fetch me every single night. His programs were usually in the evenings at one or the other of various masajid in Cape Town, and they would take me with them to the programs, and I would sit in and I would listen to the programs. And Alhamdulillah, I gained a lot of benefits from those particular programs. His moderation, his hatred for extremism really struck me and really influenced me and guided me a lot in terms of what I wanted to achieve with the organization which I run, which is ILM-SA. And on the last day that I was in Cape Town, I think it was, Maulana Ihsan Hendricks arranged for me to meet Sheikh Yusuf Al-Qaradawi at the offices of the Muslim Judicial Council. He was a very humble man. He was very, very respectful. And he reminded me a lot of Sheikh Salman Al-Auda, a contemporary of his who is sadly languishing in a Saudi prison as we speak. They have sat on various committees of scholars together. And he reminded me of Sheikh Salman Al-Auda in the sense that I didn't feel I wasn't made to feel inferior in any way by virtue of the fact that I was a woman, which can be a problem in various spheres within our community. And at this point, I want to share a tribute which another sister, an activist and an academic, Sophia Surti, posted on social media about Yusuf Qaradawi, Sheikh Yusuf Qaradawi rather, rahimahullah. Sister Sophia also had the opportunity of meeting him. However, that was in Johannesburg during the same trip, which was essentially his only visit to South Africa. And she says, and I quote, "The passing of an influential person is reason for pause, reflection. Life has taken many twists and turns since the years of relentless activism around women and sacred spaces. Moments from the past stand out and come rushing back when we hear of the passing of a soul to the ultimate eternal life. Transformative moments, as if suspended in time and space. We must remember and honor the impact of a few minutes spent in the presence of such a person, how it set off a trajectory, a seed planted deep and firmly in the heart, about my place as a Muslimah in the world. No barriers, not in the mosque, not in my soul. My spiritual path led me to different ideological ways than Sheikh Qaradawi's, but the people we meet along the way all serve a greater purpose in our story, which we must stop to acknowledge with loving thanks. I will always remember the respect he showed a young 22-year-old woman, welcoming me into a room full of male ulama, to stand next to him, where I thanked him for the lecture he gave the previous night, when he actually spoke about his disappointment at the lack of women's inclusion in the mosques of our city, much to the dismay of the clergy who were expecting some of his deep usuli opinions. Newsflash, that was a deep and important principled stance which truly related to the heart of Reformation. He paid attention to everything I said and gave me a lengthy, considered response, despite so many people waiting for their photo op with him, people who still haven't taken his advice on this issue in their own mosques with their token inclusion. May Allah forgive me for my bitterness. I release my expectation from these spaces empty of love, where I actually wouldn't even want to visit any longer, let alone pray. Alhamdulillah for the sacred spaces, mosques, circles, and collectives I am blessed to be a part of. When I stepped back momentarily, feeling intimidated by all the men in the room, he told me not to feel afraid and come forward as he was with me. I hold gratitude in my heart for this encounter, the dawning of a realization that there are a diversity of understandings of our beautiful faith, all of which unfold to an open, seeking heart. May Allah's mercy envelope Sheikh Qaradawi, unquote.
Yes, what a beautiful tribute, and obviously a lot of food for thought. And what actually stands out in the tribute by Safia Surki is he cared for the Ummah, and when we talk here about the Ummah, he cared for the men and the women of the Ummah. And I was just reading this tribute by Sharif Hassan Al-Banna, where towards the end of the tribute, he talks about the conscience of the Ummah. That is how he was described by his one-time deputy. And this is the question that is being raised right at the end of this tribute, saying, the question I find myself asking now is, who will be the Ummah's conscience for the next century? Because we are talking of someone who passed away. It was an error. We're talking about 96 years. So we can easily talk about the next century as well as to who will lead this Ummah, like Sheikh Yusuf Al-Qaradawi has done, Sister Fatima.
Yes, that's so true. And what really stood out about him for me was the fact that not only was he an alim, an illustrious alim, an extremely, extremely learned alim, but side by side, alongside being an alim, he was an activist. And he was an activist from a very young age. Those of us familiar with his life will know that he was part of Ikhwan al-Muslimin, and he also fought against the British colonialists in Egypt. And I read in researching my part or my contribution to this program that he was arrested numerous times for the various stances that he took in his life. In fact, he was also sentenced to death in absentia. And subhanAllah, he was really an activist. And I first was introduced to him when I was around 18 or 19 years old. And this was through his book, The Lawful and Prohibited in Islam. It's perhaps one of his best known works, which was translated into the English language. I learned from the same tribute you were referring to now by Sharif Hassan Al-Banna that he's written 200 books, subhanAllah. But when I picked up this particular book, I was young, I was not practicing. The opinions that he was presenting, and we're talking many years ago because I'm now in my mid-40s and this was before my early 20s. The opinions that he was presenting were so contemporary in their outlook and so moderate in their outlook that I, having been someone who was conditioned within a specific traditional sort of Muslim community, felt that they were foreign, and I didn't totally gel with them at the time because I was immature and not exposed to the wider world out there. But as I developed as an individual, I came to appreciate his work and his various fatwa, and then I was editing something for a particular website, and I came across an article in which they were criticizing him. And the reason they were criticizing him is because he was speaking out against the Taliban's demolition or their intention to demolish Buddhist statues in Afghanistan. And that really struck me. His respect for history and his willingness to speak out against any form of injustice, irrespective of whether it was being committed by a Muslim or someone from another faith group. And I think that these were qualities that were very, very rare, are very rare. And may Allah bless us with many, many more scholars who can be ulama as well as activists, inshallah.
Well, Sister Fatima, I think what you're saying is very, very true. Is sometimes we do not appreciate the ulama, or we have very little knowledge about these great scholars that are in the world. And it's only when they leave the world that we get to know them. Because, recently we heard of the passing away of the Canadian Da'i, the Islamic scholar Sheikh Muhammed Al-Sharif. And now many South African Muslims did not know of his existence. A few years ago, you mentioned earlier on, and Sheikh Salman Al-Auda was imprisoned as well. And, many South Africans did not know about him until it came out in the open that he was imprisoned. And now we can say the same about Sheikh Dr. Yusuf Al-Qaradawi. So, this begs the question that, why do you think so that, is this going to change where we can actually recognize and appreciate these great scholars?
Okay, I think it was in a sense a fear of the unknown, because in the days prior to Wi-Fi and prior to high-speed internet access like fiber, we had very, very limited exposure to Islamic thought outside the boundaries of South Africa. And we grew to place ulama in a box and place other people in boxes as well. This is our box, and these are their boxes, and we belong in this box and they belong in that box, and we do not mix and we do not take knowledge from that box. And we were particularly influenced by Indo-Pak schools of thought. Because may Allah be pleased with them, these were the institutions that we were familiar with in our midst. Then there was the advent of dial-up internet and limited exposure to websites, to the teachings of scholars like Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi, Sheikh Salman al-Oda. All of them featured very prominently on various websites as well as television stations. So those of us who could access these particular resources, this catalyzed for us a revolution within our hearts and our souls. If we were open to that revolution taking place, if we were willing to stand back and not judge and recognize that these people too, upon the Quran and the Sunnah, these people too were the holders of knowledge, and we could take knowledge from them as well. But unfortunately, a lot of us remain conditioned by how we had been brought up and were very, very resistant to taking knowledge from outside familiar territory. And so we fought and we labeled and we shouted and we kicked up a fuss and we pamphleteered, etc., etc., etc. But Brother Inayat, I think things are changing. I think with the advent of social media platforms like Instagram, YouTube, even WhatsApp, Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, all of the social media platforms, people are becoming more and more attuned to the fact that there are different opinions out there. There are a wide array of classifications of scholars. A scholar could have studied in Medina, he could have studied in Egypt, he could have studied in Doha, he could have studied in India, Pakistan, South Africa, wherever he could have studied. It is not for us to judge him. It is for us to take the good and leave the bad, and inshallah recognize that that he too or she too, and alhamdulillah, there's also an amazing what's the correct word to use? There's an amazing number of female scholars that are now coming to the fore. Like we have Sheikh Haifa Yunus, who's going to be visiting South Africa soon. We have someone who's more along the lines of a motivational speaker, Sister Yasmin Mujahid, who was here recently. So I think with the advent of technology, our minds are opening and more people are becoming receptive towards accepting people from different backgrounds and from outside of the territory that they traditionally were accustomed to. And alhamdulillah, I think that's a great thing. And I pray that Allah keeps the Ummah united upon the Quran and the Sunnah, and fills us with the spirit of brotherhood and sisterhood within our hearts and our souls, inshallah.
I mean, and just finally, Sister Fatima, you mentioned that we need to take the good from Dr. Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi, and you mentioned 200 books, and also interesting to see in this tribute by Sharif al-Banna talking about his own autobiography. Now, I mean, that would be very, very interesting, because we're talking about an autobiography in 5 volumes, which is entitled Ibn al-Qarya wal-Kutub, Son of the Village and Quran School. Now, this autobiography alone would provide us with a detailed and, I'm sure, a very unique insight into this fascinating life of Dr. Yusuf al-Qaradawi.
Yes, subhanallah. I didn't even know that his father passed away when he was 2 years old. His mother passed away when he was a teenager. He memorized Al-Quran when he was just 10 years old. He obtained a PhD at a relatively young age. He traveled far and wide in search of knowledge and to propagate knowledge. He founded numerous bodies, organizations, banks, charities, etc., etc. he was the head of the International Union of Muslim Scholars, which is the largest body of ulama in the world. So his entire life, from the time he was a child until the day that he passed away at the ripe old age of 96, is fascinating. And imagine the lessons that we could take from that particular life that he lived. And I'm very, very interested to know, the author of the tribute that you mentioned doesn't specify whether that particular book has been translated into English. And I hope that as part of keeping the legacy of Sheikh Yusuf Qaradawi, rahimahullah, alive, somebody or a group of people that is equipped with the skills to do so will actually undertake to translate that biography, so that we may all now benefit from the conscience of the Ummah, as his contemporary Sheikh Abdullah bin Baya called him. And alhamdulillah, on the bright side, a lot of us may not have known him while he was alive. He's passed away now, and because we are being bombarded with tributes from every direction on social media, we are coming to know of him, and that is a beautiful thing. Alhamdulillah. So we will continue to benefit from his knowledge, even though he's no longer with us. We will continue to benefit from his spirit and his approach, even though he's no longer with us. And the beauty in that is that, inshallah, us benefiting from his knowledge and his approach and acting thereupon will inshallah serve as a means of sadaqah jariyah for him.
Well, inshallah, Sister Fatima, I must say jazakallah to you. And I've actually got a message that's come here on my WhatsApp saying, so good to hear Fatima Asmal. She's such a value to the Muslim media, very valuable. So alhamdulillah, jazakallah to you for taking time out and spending this last 20 minutes or so remembering and also paying tribute to Sheikh Dr. Yusuf Al-Qaradawi, rahimahullah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept your efforts. I know you're doing wonderful work when it comes with ILM-SA as well. And Allah ta'ala grant you the ability to continue. Allah reward you. Allah accept all your efforts, Fatima.
Ameen. Jazakallah khairan, brother Inayat. May Allah continue to use you and Salam Media for the service of his deen. Ameen. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. That was Sister Fatima Asmal joining us, and we're going to go for a break. And when we come back, a lot more tributes to Sheikh Dr. Yusuf Al-Qaradawi, rahimahullah. We have got Anwar Jhetam Media Review Network who will be up next. We also have got Muhammed Nordien who will be joining us a little later on.
Breaking stereotypes, moving boundaries, joining hands. Salam Media. Humanity sets the agenda.
You know, it's a wonder how kids get anything done these days. With all the distractions, when do they even get time to study? As a mother, all I can really do is make sure they have all they need to perform at their best. That's why I choose to include Sunfoil, triple refined pure sunflower oil with every meal I make. Naturally cholesterol-free and approved by the Heart and Stroke Foundation as part of a balanced eating plan. So whether I'm cooking, frying or baking, I know every dish will be a wholesome one. Sunfoil, now we're cooking.
Africa. Millions are in need of aid in Pakistan as devastating flash floods engulf the country, wreaking destruction and loss of life in their wake. Africa Muslims Agency is providing food, hygiene kits, tents, and emergency supplies for 8,500 rands or any amount per family. Donate now to Heal Pakistan via africamuslimsagency.co.za and help thousands of displaced families. Africa Muslims Agency, commemorating 35 years of empowering, educating, inspiring.
With so many investment options today, it's only natural that you might feel a little confused which route to take. Should I buy shares or should I invest in gold bullion? Randery Jewelers now brings you the Zahab coin, an alternative to the Kruger Rand. The Zahab coin, a solid wealth protector in its purest form of 24-karat gold, is the safest way to protect your wealth. So don't just sit there and watch your paper money depreciate. Change to gold. Call Randery Jewelers now at 031-202-4701 or visit www.rjcoin.co.za, situated at 151 Essenwood Road, Musgrave, Durban. Randery Jewelers, the family name you can trust. Listen to something fresh. Listen to Salam Media.
Well, we continue with the broadcast, and tonight's tribute is to Sheikh Dr. Yusuf Qaradawi, rahimahumullah. And alhamdulillah, until now, we've heard some wonderful tributes coming through from Dr. Takriti from the Cordoba Foundation, from Fatima Asmal with the Institute for Learning and Motivation, ILM-SA. And we're going across now to be joined by Anwar Jhetam with the Media Review Network. Anwar, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Jazakallah khaira for having me.
Yes, wonderful you're able to join us. And, clearly until now, we've heard glowing tributes and the great legacy and recognizing the giant that Sheikh Dr. Yusuf Qaradawi was, Brother Anwar.
Now, firstly, I would like to say, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un, and to offer my condolences to the family, friends, colleagues, and students of Sheikh Dr. Yusuf Qaradawi, wherever they may be. And he has quite a number of students internationally. And so my sincerest condolences to them. It is indeed a very great loss for the Ummah, but for humanity as a whole.
Well, certainly for humanity, and this is the point that we had made earlier on with Dr. Takriti. He was a loss to not only to Muslims, but to humanity and at large. Now, just looking at this giant and, Anwar, in paying tribute to him, what goes through your mind? What are your memories when we are paying this tribute, in terms of what makes Dr. Yusuf Qaradawi stand out, amongst the rest?
Okay. Firstly, with regards to myself, I did not personally have the opportunity of meeting Sheikh Yusuf Qaradawi, unfortunately. But I have been reading his works for about almost 20 years, if not more. In my teens, the first book of his that I picked up, like so many others around the world, was his book, Al-Halal wal-Haram fil Islam, also known as the Halal and the Haram in Islam, a translated version. And that was in my teens. And I would use that text because I was interested already in Islamic studies at that time. I would use that text basically to answer my questions that I had, which I would say the views of Sheikh Qaradawi at that time. Yes, they were definitely a breath of fresh air, but more so as a young person, what I found was that the text in that particular book introduced me to a wide range of opinion. So at a very young age, the idea that there can be more than one opinion in a fiqh matter, in a matter of fiqh, in a matter of Islamic jurisprudence, really that credit must be given to Sheikh Yusuf Qaradawi through his book Al-Halal wal-Haram in Islam. Because in there, while it's, it's written in a way that the average Muslim who is not a scholar will be able to read and understand, it opens you up to a plethora of opinions. And, immediately as you do that, you come into contact with more than just one view, where there is legitimate diversity within Islamic law on any particular issue. It forces you to be much more open-minded towards Islam. So that's my earliest memories of Sheikh Yusuf Qaradawi. Later on, my father would introduce me to other works of his, such as Priorities of the Islamic Movement in the Coming Phase, which was actually translated by Sheikh Sharif Hassan al-Banna, if I'm not mistaken, who wrote the tribute that is actually being circulated very, very widely today, and other works such as Islam Between Extremism and Rejectionism. So those kind of works was my first introduction to the Sheikh. And I would say that it really laid a foundation for my understanding of Islam years later, because even though I ended up starting to study Islam formally, the opinions of Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi, even if I never formally took them all the time or formally agreed with them, there was always this lingering thought, what would Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi have to say about this particular issue? And the internet being what it is, and starting to have access to the Arabic language, you start to research the opinions. So these are part of my early memories of Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi. And obviously what really stands out for me is the moral caliber and the moral fiber and the ethics of this late great scholar of Islam, is that he was uncompromising, especially on issues of justice, on issues of the Ummah. And all in all, I can say is that Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi was a very, very proud Muslim, and in a very uncompromising way.
Yes, and also what stands out is, for someone who lived for 96 years, now this is an era on its own, and he has actually watched the world change. He's seen the world evolve. He's seen the Muslim world evolve over a period of time. And we know what has become of the Muslim world from what it was 96 years ago, Brother Anwar. And, together with that, he mastered, obviously, Islamic traditional knowledge. That's the knowledge of the Quran, the knowledge of the Sunnah, the knowledge of Hadith. But with all the changes in the Muslim world, obviously contemporary Islam, because that is extremely important, where we know that many people would stick to traditional Islam, but things have changed. And we know contemporary Islam, and it requires ijtihad. It requires, and we've seen many of his rulings, his fatwas as well, for the signs of the times that we are living in, which is absolutely important, and that one cannot lose sight of, Brother Anwar.
Absolutely. I would frame it slightly differently, and I'll tell you why in a few seconds. Firstly, we are talking about someone that has lived 96 years according to the Gregorian calendar. But if we look according to our calendar, the calendar that started with the hijrah of the Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi lived 100 years. Yes, he would have been born in 1926, at the time when the Ottoman Khilafah was already, dwindling and at its weakest point, and he resisted the British colonization. But there's a lot of interesting things that we really need to touch on. One is that Maulana Yusuf al-Qaradawi, and I do not use this term Maulana in a very glib sense. In the Arab world, in Egypt, my experience among scholars during the time that I spent there was that the term Maulana was used only for very, very senior people as a term of respect, right? These are just cultural differences. So Maulana Yusuf al-Qaradawi had a very, very traditional classical education, one that would have exposed him to all the Islamic sciences. So by the age of 9, before the age of 10, the Sheikh was a Hafidh of the Quran. Between the ages of 9 to 18, he was already studying the Deen. That means that he would have been mastering the Arabic language. There would have been dozens of texts at the basic, elementary, and intermediate levels in the various sciences of Islamic studies that he would have been exposed to, that he would have memorized. And then he enters into the Al-Azhar system, and he stars in the Al-Azhar system. Throughout his academic career, Allama Yusuf al-Qaradawi was basically always at the top of his class. So this is a person who's basically his ILM program was not a 6 to 7 or 5 year stint, studying the classical text. He would have been exposed to much, much more than most students are currently today. Also, we have to understand is that he was also a student in a university system that at that time, even up until now, was the foremost leading institution of Islamic studies in the world. So his Islamic education would have been very, very, very thorough. But to his credit, while he was in his teens, Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi was inspired by the teachings of Imam Hassan al-Banna, rahimahullah, and also he would then later on in his life, he would encounter another very, very important scholar that's oftentimes forgotten, but his works are critical, and this is Sheikh Muhammad al-Ghazali. And it's really also with Sheikh Muhammad al-Ghazali that Qaradawi would now, let's say, come into a realm of perhaps maybe pursuing this path of ijtihad. Ijtihad is, the doors of ijtihad firstly are not closed. There is only one Islam, and there is but just different understandings of Islam within the traditional house of Islam. Now, Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi continued that ijtihadi trend. When we read his books, we can see that his works operate at several levels. One is that the books were oftentimes written in a way that's highly accessible to a modern audience, whether it's in its original Arabic or it's in its translated versions in the different languages that his works have been translated in, English, Turkish, French, and so forth. But you can see that this is somebody who really has a very in-depth understanding of the modern world and the issues that have contributed to the modern world. And his works are structured in a way that also part of its accessibility from a textual point of view is that it's not framed in a way where, for example, it was written for, let's say, 500 years ago, as certain classical texts are. Yes, he does draw on many, many classical sources because he was a master of the classical tradition. He came out of a very, very classical institution that continues to produce good scholarship. So he was a son of the Al-Azhar University and the entire Al-Azhar system, which is not just a standalone university. It has its own high school, its own primary school, and dare I even say possibly its own Montessori today. I met people like that in Egypt whose entire educational career from the time that they were learning how to read and write was through Al-Azhar. And it seems that Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi would have had a similar kind of experience, if not exactly the same. Yes, the university itself has changed, but he was a product of this great institution. But be that as it may, he was not static in his understanding, and he was really looking at the current changes in the world over the various decades as he formulated his opinions on different issues. What's also promising to note is that on certain issues over periods of time, he changed his opinions on certain matters. But that just shows the great, let's say, the depth of his scholarship. And that's also in keeping with the Islamic tradition, because we have, for example, our various imams of fiqh, whether it be Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Malik, Imam Shafi'i, Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal, and others, that at various times in their life, they would change their opinions, perhaps default to other opinions or change their opinions entirely. This is part and parcel of the fiqh tradition. And in that sense, Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi was no different. But he really pushed this idea of engaging the contemporary world and applying his mind to contemporary circumstances and not engaging in Muslim nostalgia, trying to recreate the past, which unfortunately, that's something our community, that's a trap that our community oftentimes falls into. Yes, Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi on many issues pursued the idea of wasatiyya, basically the moderate path or the middle path. And he is, as the article points out, he's credited as being the Imam of wasatiyya, and also taking a very long-term approach. So in my tribute, my obituary that I wrote for him, that was featured by the Media Review Network, is that I call Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi a civilizationalist, because this was somebody that was thinking so far ahead in terms of what would be the fate of the Ummah in 100 years from now. And Sheikh Qaradawi talked about what we call fiqh al-awlawiyat, the fiqh of priorities. And that is something clearly lacking, particularly in our local environment here in South Africa, where we need to, we need to prioritize, be able to arrange priorities of the community accordingly, because we need to be asking ourselves, are issues of photography the most important issues to be arguing about, or do we have more systemic issues that we need to be challenging? And through works like works like fiqh al-awlawiyat and so forth, priorities of the Islamic movement in the coming phase, we can basically start to tap into the framework that will allow us to to actually set priorities as a community. And that's really what Sheikh Al-Qaradawi wanted for the Muslim Ummah, because oftentimes our disunity in the Ummah may not be on the more serious issues. They sometimes can literally be minor issues where there is a lot of diversity within fiqh and within the canon of Islamic studies. So in that sense, Sheikh Al-Qaradawi's vision was extremely far-reaching, and on principles, he was uncompromising.
Well, he certainly was uncompromising in more ways than one. And, we've spoken so much about his knowledge, but also in terms of uncompromising when it came to the world and what is taking place around the world, looking at political Islam, looking at Islam from a governance perspective. And this is the reason why Sharif Abanna, in his tribute, speaks about him being courageous and he never hesitated in standing up to truth, peace, for peace and justice. Dictators of the world, of the Muslim world, were actually terrified of him. So he was fully aware of political Islam and what that actually meant for the Muslim Ummah as well.
Yes, absolutely. Sheikh Al-Qaradawi, rahimahullah, would have spent about 3 to 4 times, he would have had 3 to 4 stints in prison, as well as been exiled from his home country for a very, very long time, only returning back to Egypt in 2011 after perhaps maybe 30 to 40 years in exile, almost 50 years actually in exile. So this was a person that was definitely uncompromising in his principles. In absentia, there was a death sentence that was passed against him. That's also an experience that he had. But what is very, very telling, and we even seen this at the janazah of the Sheikh, was the tribute that the Islamic resistance movement paid to Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi. There were 2 great speeches given by the Islamic resistance movement, Hamas particularly. The first was by Sheikh Ismail Haniya, and the second would have been by Khalid Mish'al at the very grave of Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi. And you can see the type of relationship that they had with him, to a point, for example, where Khalid Mish'al even says that he was a father figure to them and to everyone in their generation who was working for Islam, and he was unafraid to challenge the status quo. He was unafraid to break the silence against tyranny and oppression, and to constantly, wherever in the world where Muslims were being oppressed, to speak out against it and to mobilize towards lifting the oppression against those Muslims. Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi was not a nationalist. He was deaf. He was an internationalist. He also was not in any way obsessed with the Arab identity. Yes, he was an Arab himself, but he recognized Muslims from every other part of the world, and he was widely traveled, and he was exposed to the different thinking within the Ummah. So, for example, the ulama of Deoband, the ulama of Nadwa, the ulama of Medina, of Syria, Turkey, Africa, they all would have interacted with him. He would have interacted with. They all would have interacted with him, and he would have interacted with them. And many of them had, very many great things to say about him, even while disagreeing with him. And this is something really beautiful about when you read some of the tributes. One of them that comes to mind is by also a very contemporary scholar who's doing a lot of phenomenal work, and that is Sheikh Faraz Rabbani. And Sheikh Faraz Rabbani seems to be from a school of thought that when perhaps he disagrees with Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi, perhaps on a number of issues. However, when you read his tribute to the late Sheikh, you can see the level of respect and the acknowledgement that he has for the type of input that Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi made. And that is something really beautiful to see, because without necessarily, let's say, just carpet sweeping issues, he was able to, acknowledge him and to credit him for his contributions, whatever the differences may have been, and offer, dua for his maghfirah and, for Jannatul Firdaus for the Sheikh, inshallah. And to really see that was a very, very mature thing. And that's just one example. And that's the type of engagement that I think Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi, would have had with his colleagues from different parts of the Muslim world, at different levels of scholarship and activism and knowledge. And that's what he promoted. And that's solely what's needed in the Ummah right now.
Well, certainly is. And you made mention of Sheikh Hassan al-Banna and his association, and when it came to Sheikh Hassan al-Banna, and which brings to mind, the Ikhwan al-Muslimun. And, when you speak about Sheikh Ismail Haniya as well, because these are all people that actually had a close association with the Muslim Brotherhood, with the Ikhwan al-Muslimun as well. And they actually recognize the challenges that Muslims had faced after the fall of the Khilafah, when the Muslim states were broken down. You mentioned he was not a nationalist, he was an internationalist. And we know what has actually happened, how nationalism had actually crept into the Muslim world. And, these are things that Sheikh Qaradawi had also recognized. And this is the reason why he was such a giant, and why leaders or dictators in the Muslim world were so fearful of him.
Absolutely. You would have seen, the changing of time, the dawn of the passing of the 20th century, the dawn of the 21st century with all its myriad changes. He would have interacted with the founding father of the Ikhwan al-Muslimin, Imam Hassan al-Banna, rahimahullah. And, many of people within that movement, Imam Muhammed al-Ghazali as an example, and so many others. And later on, for example, with the emergence of the Islamic resistance movement in Palestine that stands against the Zionist occupation, that is the only true leadership for Palestinian people. We would see, for example, the Islamic resistance movement interacting with Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi. It would be very, very interesting to see the type of influence that he would have had on them. In his tribute to Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi, Khalid Mish'al goes on to say that, they studied under him, and he offered them advice, and he was a father figure to them, and that's quite profound. Also, we can see, for example, over the years, the maturation and the progression, particularly of the Islamic resistance movement in Palestine, their maturity in handling certain issues. One can only wonder, the Sheikh's influence in those kind of matters, in the type of training and tarbiyah, that he would have offered, to people that were coming to him. So that's really, really very, very, very telling. Time will tell. We're hoping that these stories will be told for the benefit of the Ummah, inshallah. So that 5-volume work, his autobiography, I hope that that's published and that it's even translated into many, many languages, because this definitely was one of the revivers of the Ummah in this century. It's definitely a very, very, very great loss. But as the late Sheikh Maulana Taha Kiran of South Africa, who definitely, I believe, would have met Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi, he said the Ummah will complete its destiny. And we have faith in that, as that is the promise of the Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that the Ummah will fulfill its mission. So as such, we, despite being very, very sad at the passing of Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi, We accept this as the decree of Allah, because nothing happens except by the will and permission of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we can hope and pray for wise leadership in better days, inshallah.
Well, inshallah, Ameen. Jazakallah khairan so much for that, Brother Anwar, for your participation on the discussion in paying tribute to Sheikh Yusuf Al-Qaradawi, rahimahumullah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept your efforts. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward you for coming on and for talking, and also all the wonderful work that you are doing, Brother Anwar. Jazakallah so much for your time. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Shukran jazilan. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Anwar Jhetam joining us from the Media Review Network this evening. We're going to go for a break. When we come back, we'll be joined by Muhammed Nordien as we continue paying tribute to the great Sheikh, rahimahumullah.
Ramadan, 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 Ramadan. The new moon will come upon. The month of fasting has begun. It's time to purify the hearts, and so we will come. Ramadan, 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 Ramadan. We are one, oh, we are one. One ummah under the sun, one ummah praising one. We are one.
The time is just gone 11 minutes past 8 a.m. as we continue with the broadcast this evening in paying tribute to the late Sheikh Yusuf Al-Qaradawi, rahimahullah. And until now, alhamdulillah, there's just so much that has been unpacked as far as the life of Sheikh Yusuf Al-Qaradawi goes with the guests that we've had until now, and just unpacking so much, bringing so much, and also first-hand accounts of people like Fatima, Asmal, who had actually met him, and also the insightful interview we've just had with Anwar Jhetam regarding Sheikh Yusuf Al-Qaradawi and the impact he's made to the Muslim world. And joining us right now is security risk analyst Muhammed Nordien. Muhammad Noor, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome. Muhammad Noor. Okay, I see. Oh, there we go. There we see Muhammad Noor. Assalamu alaikum, Muhammad Noor. How are you doing?
Alhamdulillah, I'm well. I'm doing well, alhamdulillah.
Yes.
And yourself?
Yes, no, alhamdulillah, doing well, man. Wonderful linking up with you once again, Muhammad Noor. Obviously, we are paying tribute to this great Sheikh, Dr. Yusuf Al-Qaradawi, and you being a student of Deen. You have obviously studied in Medina, and I'm sure you must have been exposed a lot as a young person while you were studying in Medina, and also having, quite an insight into Sheikh Dr. Yusuf Al-Qaradawi and what he actually, his life, and also what he meant for the Muslim Ummah at large.
Jazakallah khair. Thank you for having us and having this program this evening. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Interestingly, I was 9 or 8 years old, and I picked up a book that my father was reading. I just picked it up. I wasn't that smart. I just picked up a book that was lying in the house, and it was Halal and Haram in Islam by Yusuf Qaradawi. And I remember I would ask my father about it. My father was like, you're busy with that book again, I don't have time to explain to you. Just found this up. So one of the first books that I knew a name of, was Halal Haram. It was in English, and later I would read it in Arabic and so forth. But Sheikh Yusuf Qaradawi, is a very interesting personality. He's extremely complex. He's a very complex person, and he's complex in his. I would rather say he became complex as the politics of the Mid East became more complex in the last 20 years. And Sheikh Yusuf Qaradawi also is not insulated from the historical events that shaped his life. If anything, Yusuf Qaradawi is probably the last person of a generation. Yusuf Qaradawi was born in 1926. 1926, the 1920s in the Mid East was a very interesting time. It was just the end of World War I. End of World War I was extremely important in the Mid East because that saw the expulsion of the Turks from the Mid East. The Turks threw their lot in with the Germans, and we all know what happened with that. There was the Arab Revolution against the Turks within that period. So the Turks were expelled from the Mid East at that time. The Khilafah fell at around 1920. Qaradawi was born in 1926. Al-Hassan al-Banna dies in 1946, 45, around there. So Yusuf Qaradawi is probably one of the last people who's alive who would have been able to have probably met Hassan al-Banna, who was around at the time when the Muslim Brotherhood was started. Although Hassan al-Banna started the movement around when Qaradawi was born. When Qaradawi is in his 20s, the Arabs lose against Israel, and the state of Israel comes into existence. In 1952, the monarchy falls in Egypt, and all of these very interesting historic events happen within the Mid East. And anyone who came from especially from Egypt at that time, they were extremely intense, all of them, whether they were secular leaders, whether they were just authors and linguist critics like Edward Said, etc., Monfaluti, etc., or whether they were artists like Kulthum. Everyone who was born in the 20s, 30s, and were of some note later in life, they were extremely intense, and some of them were very controversial. And it's because the Arab world, which is intertwined with an Arab and Muslim identity, went through a lot of pressure, and there was a lot of compression on the Muslim identity, the Arab identity at that time. And so Qaradawi, as he grows up, as in his formative years, he witnesses this. And also keeping in mind that, of course, he goes through the very traditional form of education, Al-Azhar Sharif, and so forth. And if you look at the type of people who he then interacts with in his journey in life, as a scholar from the Muslims. I mean, he's a contemporary of Sayyid Qutb. He's a very good friend of Muhammad Qutb, who's Sayyid Qutb's brother. Sheikh Muhammad Qutb, rahimahullah. I mean, he's much older than me, but he's someone who I knew personally, and in some strange way, he was also one of my teachers. So Sheikh Yusuf Qaradawi then experiences a lot of history. And so he is not, and here's the issue, he is not an observer. He is not an observer of history. He is not just an observer of the Muslim Brotherhood. He is not just a scholar who advises. He's part of this movement. He's part of history as an intellectual. And once you understand that, and you grasp that, or you try to grasp in its totality, then it gives you a better understanding, and it gives you a better filter, I would say, or gives you better insight into understanding him then as a complex character politically in the last 20 or 15 years. What makes him even more interesting is that Sheikh Yusuf Qaradawi, and here's the thing, you find there are many scholars, like, for example, Sayyid Qutb, Abu al-A'la al-Mawdudi, and I'm talking about within the broader Ikhwani movement, right, who are intellectuals, but they are not fuqaha. Sheikh Yusuf Qaradawi was a faqih. Sheikh Yusuf Qaradawi, by the recognition of his peers and the conservative peers, like Sheikh Abdul Aziz bin Baz, rahimahullah, Sheikh Nasr ibn Albani, Sheikh and so forth, these ulama, these mashayikh, they're his peers, Sayyid Sabiq, Wahab al-Zahali, these ulama of fiqh, these are his contemporaries, So in terms of fiqh and tajdeed in fiqh, a lot of people try to push Yusuf Qaradawi as being quote unquote a moderate, and that term, that word, and using him or using the term he's a moderate, it's very shrewd, because Yusuf Qaradawi is not a moderate in the sense in which we understand, or which the term moderate is projected. The year 2022. Yusuf Qaradawi was actually a conservative. Qaradawi is a conservative. He has a conservative worldview. He views the text and interprets it conservatively, and he uses conservative religious texts to rationalize and to justify his point. And he does not call in any way for a modernization of Islamic thought. And he does not try to negate in any way. If any way, Sheikh Qaradawi is a master at using traditional text, traditionalist tools, because he's a traditionalist, and applying it to where he is today, whether it be in fiqh, whether it be in pure politics, etc. And I think this is what makes him a very interesting personality. And Allah yarham, was a great scholar, and he will definitely be missed.
Yes. Of course. Muhammad Noor, obviously, you speak about him being conservatives, and others say that obviously he followed the middle path. But more importantly, the point that you made was, he not modernizing Islamic thought in any way whatsoever, and not moving away from that. But also at the same time, because you mentioned that, Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi is history, he's part of history. So he's seen so much, he's witnessed so much, he's seen the metamorphosis, he's seen the ever-changing Muslim world. And as far as his knowledge goes, as far as his fatwas go as well, together with watching how things have evolved or changed over a period of time, the whole concept of ijtihad as well, because, that obviously stands out, that, he didn't move away from Islam, pure Islam, in his true sense of the word. But at the same time, when it came to ijtihad, when it came to accommodating changing times, he played quite a huge role. He played a relevant role in that regard.
Definitely, when it comes to the issue of ijtihad and being a purist Muslim, a purist scholar, in reference to many liberal and left-wing scholars who try to claim everyone and everything under the name of being moderate, Interesting, even within the Ikhwani movement, Sheikh Yusuf Qaradawi has a very interesting opinion on Sayyid Qutb. This is for the record. You read it, it's out there, So Yusuf Qaradawi had a divergent opinion and was extremely critical of Sayyid Qutb on Sayyid Qutb's opinion of takfir. So Sayyid Qutb in Ma'arif al-Tariq, in Milestones, takes a very aggressive position on takfir, where you could say he almost and let me just say this just to say this and park it. So Sayyid Qutb in Ma'arif al-Tariq, in Milestones, he almost goes as far as proclaiming that after the period of the Prophet there's no Islam, and so many interpret it or saying, that let's say he's very generous in blanket takfir. And Yusuf Qaradawi was very, very critical up till the end of this opinion of Sayyid Qutb, and said very clearly that Qutb's opinion on takfir is not correct, and that opinion is not the opinion of Ahl Sunnah. But of course, Yusuf Qaradawi rahimahullah, within the Muslim Brotherhood, so this is an opinion, divergent opinion within the Muslim Brotherhood. And Yusuf Qaradawi rahimahullah, he explains further in his life, wherever else, where he wrote with the interviews, that he did not have a personal difference with Sayyid Qutb as a person, and he did not proclaim that Sayyid Qutb himself was kafir. He just had a difference of opinion with him. So to show that he even had differences with other traditionalists, and within his own movement. I believe that Sheikh Yusuf Qaradawi rahimahullah, what also helped his popularity, was his age and his timing. That's very interesting. His age and his timing, because Sheikh Yusuf Qaradawi was one of the first ulama from that region to capitalize on the internet. So Islam Online was his website that came online, I think, in the early 2000s. late 90s, early 2000s, before anyone else was online. His association with Al Jazeera. We had Islam wal Haya, Islam in Life, which I think was a weekly a program. It was just almost like Islam in Life, questions, discussions, engagement, and we all know the popularity that Al Jazeera had as television channel long before it became Al Jazeera International English in the Mid East. It started in the late 90s. It was extremely popular. So Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi, managed to. I mean, he had this huge compounded reservoir of knowledge and information, which was in text and in books, which, I mean, if you're interested into read it, etc. But then from the late 90s, this information was able to disseminate it to the Arab world through these platforms, and to the non-Arab world as well. So even a book like Al-Halal Haram Islam and his other books, those are specialist books. Not everyone would have read it in the 90s and even in 2000s. They're very interesting books on fiqh and so forth. So Al-Qaradawi was very good in that, and of course this was a catalyst to his information being shared and so forth. Sheikh Al-Qaradawi, because of the respect that he had amongst other scholars across the world, whether it be from the Indo-Pak region up to the Saudi, up to the North Africa, Abdullah bin Bay and these guys, so all of them respected him. And he was very when the Taliban first became something, and after 9/11, he was amongst the scholars who actually spoke to them and met with them and engaged them. And on many other big international issues, Al-Qaradawi was someone who was part of engaging. So he was also very smart, although he was exiled from Egypt in the 60s around there. He was always very relevant in the Mid East, so he was welcome in Saudi, welcome in most of the Arab world, and this was the kind of agreement. I mean, even people like Sheikh Muhammed rahimahullah, he was exiled from Egypt after Sayyid Qutb was hanged, and he was exiled in Saudi, and he lived in Saudi, and then when he was roaming around and so forth. There was interesting political agreements that these Arab leaders came up with between them. If anything, it was the Saudis, who pleaded with Sadat and Jamal Abdel Nasser, please don't execute these people. Let's broker a deal. So he was highly respected by leaders, by scholars, and he when you talk about things like fiqh al-awlawiyat, fiqh of priorities, and he was one of the first people to speak about fiqh al-aqalliyat, fiqh of minorities and so forth, and it shows the vision that he had. And it's also probably because in the 50s, 60s, 70s, there were mass migrations of Arabs to non-Arab countries, mostly to the West, mostly to Europe. And I believe that he saw the need, for Muslims to adapt to the new homes, to the new countries, to the new circumstance. And in recognizing that and then articulating that, and articulating it in a scholarly fashion. And here's the thing: a lot of scholars get up and talk, but Sheikh Al-Qaradawi rahimahullah, and that is where you see that he's a scholar. He articulated not only the emotional concerns or the structural concerns of society, but from a fiqh perspective, he addressed these concerns and he found solutions to them, and he debated them and engaged them in a very conservative textual manner. You can agree, you can disagree, etc. You can whatever it may be, but he engaged it, and he has left knowledge and information for others to come today and build on, to critique and to do with it as they please. So the knowledge that he left behind, wallah, is something that will go on and is already benefiting generations, and will continue to benefit generations.
Yes, and also I think, Muhammad, what is important to understand is, looking at his association with organizations like the Ikhwan al-Muslimin, and with people like Hassan al-Banna and Sayyid Qutb, and how has he been viewed in the Arab world as far as his political views and political affiliations go? Because we know that he has been quite critical of dictatorships in the Middle East, and we know that he himself obviously was under threat in terms of being imprisoned. His very own daughter was imprisoned as well. And just his association with the Ikhwan, we know at this point in time, the Ikhwan has been neutralized in the Arab world in totality as we speak right now. So, how would he be viewed for his political views?
When I started the discussion, I said that you cannot separate him from the history, and he is not an observer to the Ikhwan. He was part of the Ikhwan, and unfortunately, and here's the reality. People, I said there's a preface. The preface is that there is always an expectation that scholars should remain neutral. It's the same like saying journalists should remain neutral. It's humanly impossible, number one. And so Sheikh Yusuf Qaradawi, being within the Ikhwan camp, whatever whichever direction that camp then took, and whatever positives or negatives followed that camp, Sheikh Yusuf Qaradawi had to automatically go down the road with it. So, if the Mursi revolution and the Muslim Brotherhood attempt, to establish a state or numerous states within the Middle East, if that was successful, then of course the trajectory of Yusuf Qaradawi's popularity and public opinion, or at least within the movement, would have been somewhere else now. But when the Arab Spring broke out, and I don't want to get into what happened in the Arab Spring, but at the end of the day, the Muslim Brotherhood came out the losers, and that is life. You're in the game of politics. In the game of politics, in real politics, some win, some lose. They came out losing, and hence a lot of public opinion turned against the movement itself. And this was across the Middle East. And it's interesting to see, many did not know how popular the Muslim Brotherhood was in the Gulf. And only after the events of the Arab Spring, and then was it a bit clearer, or one would be shocked to see, wow, there was actually this much support for the Muslim Brotherhood as an ideology, as a broad idea, not necessarily as people were functioning part of the movement, but as an idea, as a philosophy, if you can even call it that. And so a lot of public opinion turned against the movement, and so there was a lot of negativity against Yusuf Qaradawi after that. And even today, if you read the Arabic Twitter, Arabic papers, and so forth, and just a lot of people criticizing him. For example, there was on politics, at one point he was praising Bashar al-Assad. Then a few years later, after that, he was criticizing Bashar al-Assad. His fatwa calling on the Libyan soldiers to kill Gaddafi. People saying, "Oh, what is it about?" But at the same time, interestingly, when the Taliban blew up that statue, he criticized the Taliban. So Yusuf Qaradawi was very interesting in these big political thoughts, these big political positions. But that is expected because of the movement that he was part of, and the level of the political game he was involved in. So it is expected. It is expected. Someone might say, "Hey, did he give up his impartiality at the end of his life, or so forth?" No, I don't think you can expect someone at this level, any scholar, to be totally impartial. And Sheikh Yusuf Qaradawi rahimahullah was part of a movement. And of course, there are many other fatwa, as fatwa of fiqh, which ulama disagreed with him on. But again, all of these remain fatwa. And I will recall something that Sheikh Yusuf Qaradawi himself said in an interview, where they actually asked him about Sayyid Qutb, and he, in a very soft and humble, a way, in a very comforting way, He said about Sayyid Qutb, he said, he's our brother, and in Islam, we believe that the mujtahid, that the one who seeks an answer, even if he makes a mistake, he is rewarded. And the one who makes ijtihad and gets it correct, he gets more reward. But for your ijtihad and trying your best with your dalil and with your references and with your ilm and so forth, and trying to fulfill the maslahah al-amma, of course he is rewarded. Sheikh Qaradawi rahimahullah, irrespective of the mistakes which some scholars attribute to him, they remain scholarly issues. And even if there were bigger issues, at a macro level, which many view as negative or wrong, etc. There remain issues of ijtihad. But what is undoubtedly true, which everyone agrees on, even those who critique him, he is a scholar, rahimahullah, and he is probably the last of that generation of scholars, who scholars, the generation of fuqaha, real ulama of fiqh, and probably one of the last great scholars that the Azhar and the Mid East has produced of that caliber, rahimahullah.
Yes, Muhammed, in fact, just talking about scholars and just your thoughts on what Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi would have meant for the scholarly fraternity right across the entire world, particularly in terms of what he achieved during his entire lifetime and the legacy that he would be leaving behind.
So, Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi, rahimahullah, he wrote over 100 books. And these aren't like these little booklets. He compiled 100 books, 100 pieces of amazing in-depth work, from fiqh to social commentary, to political commentary. And so that's the first thing is his works are all references. So he leaves this magnitude of references behind for generations to learn from. Sheikh Qaradawi, of course, was of course an extremely senior scholar. So he is someone who many scholars around the Muslim world, I know, would seek advice from, would seek his opinion on. And there were many institutions and awqaf and educational institutions, of which he was a patron. And so a lot of these institutions lose his patronage, and his patronage was his wisdom and his knowledge and his network. And so, the Muslim world is of course poorer without Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi. But alhamdulillah, I'm sure that there definitely are new generations of scholars who are coming up. But I know he's 4 years short of 100 years. And if you just think of what history looked like in that part of the world, and at what level of society he functioned, so that's the interesting thing. You can be alive for 100 years and just be a normal guy sitting in your flat. But if you've been around for 100 years, active for 80 years, you can see at what level, and at that level where he functioned at very, very high level of activism, intellectualism, and so forth. You have something very unique. And like I said again, you have the Maududis and Sayyid Qutubs of the world, and but they were intellectuals and they were great, etc. But Yusuf Qaradawi really was a faqih, was a faqih, and his capacity and his ability, to look into matters and to explain and to find solutions and shed light and to utilize his very traditional tools to complex matters. It's remarkable. And I don't think we'll see something of that caliber happening soon. And again, it's because of his history and his level of functioning that he had that capacity. So inshallah ta'ala, who knows who's out there.
Well, certainly, but also, Muhammed, these the caliber of people like Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi come once in the blue moon for want of a better term, and that is the reason why he was actually described by his one-time deputy and also a former close associate, calling him the conscience of the Ummah, and questioning the fact in this tribute by Sharif Hassan al-Banna, asking the question, who will be the Ummah's conscience for the next century?
You know, to be honest with you, I mean, we must also be realistic, you know. I mean, I believe a lot of what Sheikh Yusuf Qaradawi achieved was a lot of what he achieved in terms of his fame and recognition was his association and his proximity, his association with the Muslim Brotherhood, number one, and his proximity to power. His proximity to power was his proximity to power in Qatar. I mean, he was very close to the government. He was close to Al Jazeera. He was close to the levers of power. So if you're close to the levers of power and you are part of a very influential movement, of course, you are elevated and you have the capacity to influence. And I use influence in a very moderate way, in a very neutral way. You know, I'm not saying this good or bad, but he was capable of to influence thought and so forth, and to be projected. And I say that neutral because we are not saying that his ideas and his work and his knowledge is not worthy of that. We'll be very careful of that, you know. But you know, the question is, I mean, we find in the Muslim world also now, especially in the last 20 years, I might be wrong, but I believe there has been, I won't say a move away, but in the, can we call it Muslim diaspora? And you can't even call it diaspora anymore because, you know, most Muslims now live out of the Middle East. You know, most Muslims are living in Europe, living in America, living in, you know, 100 and some odd million Muslims living in 200 million Muslims alone in Indonesia, right? So there's not the diaspora. But let me rather say from an Arab perspective, right, he's definitely at the top there. But what we find is within Muslim communities in Europe, in America, in the Americas, in South Africa, and so forth, you know, we have always been, places like South Africa are much more developed in Islam and thought and our independence than you would say traditionally in America, in Europe, talking about minorities, right? So we have always been able to function and function very beautifully all these years, you know, with our internal structures. And whether our internal structures had their, for the lack of a better word, ideological reporting line up into Deoband or up into Al-Azhar or up into Al-Madinah, we did very well. And I say this with utmost respect, without Yusuf al-Qaradawi. Right? So I'm not saying that with respect, but what I'm saying is there's no alarm. No reason to be alarmed, you know. Mas'ala masail, they're going to phone the alim or the Maulana or Mufti AK or Mufti Menk, whoever it is, you know. And if there's a big issue in South Africa, we're still going to go to Mufti Rizal al-Haq and whoever took over after Mawlana Taqiran, rahimahullah, and these type of scholars, you know. So all isn't lost. But al-Qaradawi was an intellectual beacon. And that's important. You know, he was an intellectual beacon. And I think that is what we will be missing. And you know, I interviewed him a few times and I met him a few times as a young man in them days. And I remember he came to South Africa maybe 15, 17 years ago. And
2010, he was in 2010.
Was in 2014, right? And if you sat with him, he had such a very open, natural, you know, warm demeanor. And when people ask him questions, he was a very warm person and a very open person and a very jovial person, you know. And even when he spoke in his interviews, he would use classical Arabic and he would use a very normal colloquial Arabic and he would mix the two. So it was very his mode of delivery and the format of his engagement was very soft and was very accessible, and there were many people out about him in the Arab world. But in the rest of the Muslim world, he was a beacon. He was a beacon of education, a beacon of activism, And of course, the Palestinian issue. He was, you could say, he was the go-to scholar for that issue. So, as an internationalist, of course, he will deeply be missed. But and again, I say it would be useful, if you have some time, anyone has time, the listener, just go through some of his writings, go through some of his articles, and if there's anything, we in South Africa and in many parts of the Muslim world, we have many of these people, Alim, Maulana, Mufti, Sheikh, etc., etc. But what people like Sheikh Yusuf Qaradawi and these ulama, we call them real ulama, is that there are people who research, people who write in-depth opinions, in-depth works, and then you can see the value of a real alim. When they take 20, 15 volumes of when they take volumes of Bukhari or Muslim and they re-edit it and they resample and they rework the hadith, look at it and so forth, or they take a mas'ala and they read 200, 300 books to give you an opinion on something, and then they note it down. That is true scholarship. So that level, those levels of scholars do exist across the Muslim world, many of them in the Middle East. But like I said, Sheikh Yusuf Qaradawi, of course, was operating at a super high level, and as a beacon of knowledge, a beacon of activism. It's very important, because over the last 40 years in the Muslim world, there have been many interesting, huge issues that affected Muslims, which affected Muslims in certain parts of the world, but Qaradawi was there, the Afghani jihad was vocal on that, the Palestinian issue has been extremely vocal on that, the invasion of Iraq was extremely vocal on that, the invasion of Afghanistan was extremely vocal on that. But again, remember, he was also again capable of being vocal and recognized as being vocal because of his association with Al Jazeera. Remember the ulama who and he had his website in that running. But irrespective of that, he was the beacon and he was the scholar who was at the forefront, of engaging these issues very clearly, and many people around the world took guidance from him on these big international issues.
Well, Muhammad Ramasse, it's been absolutely fascinating talking to you on this particular subject and getting your insight and unpacking what you have with us this evening as we pay tribute to Sheikh Yusuf Al-Qaradawi, rahimahullah. As always, Jazakallah khair for your time.
Shukran.
I do appreciate it.
Jazakallah khair. Assalamu wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Muhammed Nordien joining us. And as we get to the end of this broadcast, we make dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant all marhooms and also Sheikh Yusuf Al-Qaradawi, we have basically returned now to his creator, to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we make dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgive him, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgive his shortcomings, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant him the highest stages in Jannah, grant him the companionship of the prophets, of the martyrs, of those who are pious, the righteous as well. And we make dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us the ability to benefit, and as Muhammad mentioned, a beacon in more ways than one, to benefit from the legacy that he has left behind. And with that, I'm going to be signing off. Once again, it's been an absolute pleasure being in the company of our Salam Media listeners, our viewers, right across the various platforms. So until we meet again, from myself and the team, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.